Hi everyone, it's Jan. In this video, we will do a critical reading of Richard Heydarian's anti-Philippines propaganda article on the Nikkei Asian review entitled Why Duterte Must Own Up to the Philippines COVID Disaster. To those who want to read the article, I have provided a link in the description. So usually, before I do a critical reading of an article, a journal, or a book, I first do kind of dirty background check on the publisher, author, etc. just so I am aware of their biases. After all, we all have biases. I myself have my own biases, which I will disclose in a separate video. While I'm doing research on this article, I found out that the political alignment of the Nikkei Asian review is center to center-right, liberal conservative. So what does this imply? Ano bang ibig sabihin nito? There are many facets to the left, center, right political spectrum. Pwede natin silang i-differentiate from each other in terms of the social, political, and economic policies that they support. But since Nikkei Asian Review is a business newspaper, I think that they lean to center-right politics in terms of their favored economic policies. Just to give you a quick explanation of the differences between left, center, and right economic policies. People from the left are more supportive of economic policies that provide for greater state control. Meanwhile, those people from the right are more supportive of policies that promote free market capitalism. This means that those in the middle, or the centrists, support a hybrid of policies that promote state control and free market capitalism. Since Nikkei Asian Review is a center to center-right business newspaper, mapapansin nyo na they are very antagonistic of China because China's economic policies, despite having market features, is very much state-controlled. I will try to do a more elaborate discussion on the left-right political spectrum in one of my future videos, so stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's start the burn. Let me first read the first paragraph of the article. No stranger to crisis and natural disasters, the Philippines' response to major calamities has long been hampered by weak institutions and a notoriously corrupt bureaucracy, but President Rodrigo Duterte's disastrous management of the COVID-19 pandemic has struck a new low. So ang sabi ni Richard Heydarian, disastrous daw ang management ng gobyerno sa COVID-19 pandemic. But my question is, what indicators did he use to come up with such an evaluation? Numbers of cases lang ba? If yes, why? We all know that using the number of cases to assess the pandemic situation of a country is extremely flawed. First, not all countries can accurately report their number of cases since some of them may be under testing or don't have the resources to increase their testing capacity. Some countries may even deliberately underreport their number of cases. Pero aside from their testing capacity, may ibang factors that could affect a country's transmission risk. Nandyan yung population size ng bansa at yung population density niya. Apparently, populous countries like the Philippines are more prone to disease transmission. High-density areas such as Metro Manila are also more susceptible to outbreaks. Makikita natin yan sa daily COVID data na nire-release ng Department of Health. Sanitation, food, climate, and even culture may also influence spread of communicable diseases like COVID-19. Kaya naman, most articles that I have read suggest that the number of deaths relative to the country's cases is still a better indicator when assessing their pandemic situation because it is less prone to misreporting and manipulation. But even then, reported death rates aren't always accurate as well. Some articles even go far as to saying that all COVID-19 statistics that we have right now are flawed, which is something that I tend to agree with, knowing that we are dealing with an invisible enemy. Heydarian, the opposition, and the anti-government media are deliberately highlighting our rising cases because it is the only number that could support their anti-government narrative. However, if we scrutinize their emphasis on the number of cases, makikita natin na hindi siya credible gauge ng sitwasyon ng bansa. It doesn't present the whole truth. So obviously, first paragraph pa lang, medyo problematic na yung article ni Heydarian. Hindi naman tayo shocked because we all know Heydarian's political leanings and anti-government stance. Okay, so let's proceed. Heydarian's second paragraph reads, "In many ways, this was a disaster waiting to happen. Elected on the promise of bringing about real change, Duterte's populist crisis management style has been bedeviled by a toxic combination of erratic leadership and authoritarian excess." Take note of his use of terms: disaster, bedeviled, toxic, erratic, authoritarian. Dito pa lang, obvious na si Kuya isn't even trying to be objective. Very alarmist and derogatory yung terms na ginagamit niya, and this article is laden with political agenda. Mahalaga din kasi yung nature ng language na ginagamit sa pagsusulat kasi it shapes the perception of the readers. So kapag mas terrorizing yung terms na ginagamit mo, mas makakapag-induce ka ng fear or anxiety sa mga nagbabasa sa sinulat mo. Ang sabi pa niya, Duterte's populist crisis management style has been bedeviled by a toxic combination of erratic leadership and authoritarian excess. Authoritarian excess? Why? Because the government imposed a nationwide lockdown? Does Heydarian know which other countries have imposed nationwide lockdowns? There's Australia, South Korea, Germany, France, New Zealand, among dozens of other countries. Authoritarian excess din ba yung ginawa ng mga bansang to? Pero sige, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Baka ibig sabihin lang niya, it is excessive of Duterte to deploy the military during the community quarantine. Pero wait, according to news reports, Germany mobilized 15,000 soldiers to help local authorities tackle their COVID-19 crisis. 15,000 soldiers. Meanwhile, an article from the World Economic Forum states that Poland activated thousands of troops to patrol streets under lockdown, disinfect hospitals, and support border control. Another article from the Korean Herald mentions that soldiers, officers, military doctors, and nurses in South Korea have joined the government's effort to stop the spread of COVID-19. The United States also deployed military personnel in many of its states, according to this article from CNN. Are all these countries authoritarian? Is their management style bedeviled by authoritarian excess? O sa Pilipinas lang applicable yung sinasabi niya? Speaking of authoritarian excess, hindi ba si Heydarian mismo yung nagsuggest na we must take cue from Vietnam's COVID-19 management, a country that arrests its citizens for challenging the government's reporting on the pandemic? The Vietnamese government even disrupted access to Facebook servers to slow access to its services as a means of pressuring the company to remove or restrict content criticizing the government. Hindi ba ito authoritarian excess for Heydarian? In the next paragraph, Heydarian states, despite the strenuous efforts of top officials to downplay the crisis, the Philippines' number of confirmed COVID-19 cases has surpassed even far more populous nations such as China and Indonesia. Among Asia-Pacific countries, only India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh have it worse. Personally, I'm dubious of China's real numbers, and we have a higher testing capacity than Indonesia. But in terms of case fatality rate, we are doing way better than Indonesia and many other countries in Asia, despite the fact that we are testing more people. So why didn't Heydarian mention that? Well, we can only guess. In the next paragraph, Heydarian states, and thanks to the overly strict lockdown which shuttered up 75% of economic activity but still failed to halt the spread of the virus, the Philippines just posted its worst quarterly economic performance on record, with the economy shrinking 16.5% in the 3 months to the end of June compared to robust growth of 5.4% for the same period last year. Yes, Heydarian, just like almost all countries in the world. In fact, the United States economy shrunk 32.9%, the worst drop in the country's GDP in history. The recession caused by COVID-19 is also expected to be the worst in the history of Latin America. Latin American countries are expected to fall into a lost decade, with Latin America's GDP returning to 2010 levels, falling by 9.9%. Meanwhile, Germany's GDP shrunk 10.1%, Japan 27.8%, Singapore 12.6%, Thailand 12.12%, Malaysia 7.1%, and so on. So following Heydarian's logic, is this because the pandemic management in these countries is bedeviled by a toxic combination of erratic leadership and authoritarian excess? To continue, Heydarian says that major cities now forced back into even stricter lockdowns after the surge in coronavirus cases, and it's far from clear how the Philippine economy will rebound as the country grapples with a crisis of unprecedented magnitude that has overwhelmed the country's healthcare system and wiped out decades worth of gains against poverty and underemployment. I mean, just replace the word Philippines in that paragraph with any other country in the world aside from maybe China, and this paragraph would still make sense because such an experience is not unique to the Philippines. All countries are experiencing the same thing. This pandemic is unprecedented. Literally no one prepared for this, and the lack of a vaccine will continue to fuel uncertainty. Personally, I would rather that we find ways to coexist with the virus rather than wait for a vaccine. Unprecedented though the crisis may be, Duterte's aberrant leadership has severely undermined the Philippines' already limited capacity to manage a national emergency of this scale. Just like other populists around the world, Duterte first obstinately ignored the pandemic, downplaying its potential to cause havoc, undermining the government's ability to implement preventive measures that have helped nearby countries such as Taiwan and Singapore. Downplaying its potential to cause havoc? Dude, we're literally one of the first countries in the world to close our borders earlier than Taiwan or Vietnam or Thailand or Indonesia. The fact is, the Philippines banned travelers from China as early as February 2. Taiwan prohibited entry on March 19. Thailand imposed travel restrictions on March 26, while Vietnam suspended entry for all foreigners on March 22. Indonesia prohibited entry on April 1. So I don't get what he means when he said that the government downplayed the situation. So the succeeding paragraphs are just Heydarian's usual anti-China buzzwords and soundbites. Pogo, Duterte loves China, Chinese workers in the Philippines, blah 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 blah. I refuse to waste time on this because all answers to these issues are all over the internet already. In the following paragraphs, Heydarian says, instead of establishing a task force made up of leading public health experts, Duterte appointed half a dozen ex-generals to oversee the management of the COVID-19 crisis. Since taking office in 2016, Duterte repeatedly slashed public health expenditures, weakening an already enfeebled healthcare sector while simultaneously courting the military by rapidly expanding their benefits and salaries. Making matters worse, the country's top health-related agencies, namely the Department of Health, led by a Duterte ally, and the PhilHealth Insurance Corporation, led by a former general from Duterte's hometown of Davao, have been hounded by allegations of corruption. Talaga ba? Slashed public health expenditures? Our 2020 health budget is the highest in the history at 164.7 billion pesos. Aside from having the highest health budget ever, it is under this government that we legalized universal health care, increased salary for public health workers, provided free college tuition for students, implemented a comprehensive infrastructure building program, among other things. As for the corruption scandals in the PhilHealth, etc., these precede Duterte. Also, didn't Duterte recently create a task force to eradicate corruption in the agency? Furthermore, Duterte has fired top government officials due to mere corruption allegations. Hindi lang ba talaga alam ni Heydarian ang mga ito or sinasadya niyang hindi banggitin? We all know the answer to that question. So, sa susunod na paragraph, sinasabi ni Heydarian na instead of focusing on crafting a recovery plan, Duterte instead launched an attack against democracy na naman by shutting down ABS-CBN and passing the anti-terror law. Again, nasagot na itong mga issues na to at ayoko nang i-explain. Pero let me just say, ABS-CBN's franchise expired. It was not shut down. And number 2, our anti-terror law still pales in comparison with some of the tougher anti-terror laws in other parts of the world. The purported lack of a recovery plan by the government is another deliberate lie espoused not just by Heydarian but those from the kabilang parlor. In fact, as early as May, mayroon ng COVID-19 economic recovery plans ang government. So, towards the end of the article, Heydarian insists that what we have is a failed strategy. But again, relative to which standards? As compared to which country? Based on which indicators? Knowing Heydarian, I guess we'll never know the answers to these valid questions. So that's it, guys. Thanks for joining me burn this propaganda article by Richard Heydarian. If you like this video, please do not forget to subscribe to my YouTube account and click the bell icon so you get notified each time I upload a new video. Also, do not forget to like my Facebook page and follow me on Twitter. I will provide links in the description. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you again soon. Bye.